Rationality Rules believes that he's given the argument from miracles the full debunking treatment. But is this a case of celebrating just a little bit premature? Hey everyone, my name is Eric Manning. I'm the writer of IsJesusAlive.com, a website that looks at the evidence for Christianity. And today I'm responding to Rationality Rules video, The Argument from Miracles Debunked. In the video, Rationality Rules believes that the argument for miracles commits 4 particular fallacies. And we'll go through these one by one. Let's go ahead and start with the first one.
So the first flaw to reveal, in my not so humble opinion, is that the vast majority of miracles wouldn't prove the existence of God even if they were indeed true. Or in other words, they don't support theism. For example, even if it were unimpeachably true that a man called Jesus resurrected, this would not, in the slightest, prove that the universe had a creator. Nor would it prove that Jesus turned water into wine, that he healed the blind, that he walked on water, or that he was born of a virgin. All it would prove is that a man called Jesus respawned, and that he had terrible lag because it took him 3 days. Likewise, even if it was unimpeachably proven that Peter Link was indeed saved by a divine intervention, it would not logically follow that a man called Jesus resurrected. Nor would it logically follow that a man called Muhammad split the moon, or that a god called Zeus defeated Kronos. This just isn't how logic works. But unfortunately, most proponents of miracles implicitly do think that this is how logic works, and to demonstrate this, here's but one example from Frank Turek.
And if it is true that that Jesus really did come and say and do the things that the New Testament writer said he did, then whatever he teaches is true, because if he rose from the dead, he was God. If he taught that there will be an intervention, then there will be. That's the argument. I don't have time to support it.
I bet you don't.
Now, first of all, I got to give anybody who uses Grumpy Cat in their videos a whole lot of respect. When I heard that Grumpy Cat passed away to kitty heaven, it was one of the saddest days of my life. Now, to give some quick background, earlier in the video, Rationality Rules tells us the tale of Peter Link. He's a plane crash survivor back in the 40s who seemingly miraculously survived. I mean, he defied all odds. He was the only person on a particular plane to survive, and it seemingly was miraculous. And Rationality Rules is right. That would not point to any particular God being the one true God. It wouldn't point to Yahweh, nor would it point to Zeus or anybody else. But that's not the same case with the resurrection.
Oh, I missed!
Video game jokes aside, if Jesus did bodily raise from the grave 3 days after he was crucified, it ought to give us some reasons to listen to what he has to say, especially if Jesus did in fact predict his own death and resurrection. Now, we read in Matthew that some of Jesus's critics came after him and said, "Give us a sign, prove to us who you are." And Jesus wasn't having any of it. He said he was going to give them one sign, and it was the sign of the prophet Jonah.
Have any of you heard the story of a man named Jonah? Yes.
That just as Jonah was in the fish's belly for 3 days and 3 nights, so Jesus would be in the heart of the earth, and he would eventually come back to life. And in doing this, it would prove that he really was God's one son and Messiah. Now, the New Testament also records that there was a huge messianic expectation in Jesus' time. So much so that John the Baptist's own disciples were asking him if he really was the Messiah or not, which John denied, at least according to the gospel accounts. Josephus, Suetonius, and Tacitus are all historians who, in their writings, talk about this Jewish messianic expectation that was, in their minds, driving some people crazy. Now, these messianic prophecies are recorded in Daniel as well as other places. It's an extremely fascinating topic, and I'd love to get into it at a later time. What I'm going to do for now is leave a link in the description of a guy by the name of Mike Winger, who's a great apologist and has a great channel. You should definitely check it out. And he gets into a lot of the prophecies there if you want more information. My point for right now is that there's this huge historical and religious context that we at least need to take into consideration in our background information. Jesus' resurrection, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. Now, here's the thing. Anybody can claim to speak for God.
We're on a mission from God.
But working miracles in front of people to back up the claims that you're doing is a whole other thing. Nicodemus got this. This is why he said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him." It's John 3:2. Now, everybody that was up close to the events, that would have been in a position to interpret these events, said that it was God who raised Jesus from the dead. It wasn't some sort of natural happening. If what they said is true, then this is a whole lot more suggestive than what Rationality Rules thinks. This is saying that the God of the Bible, Yahweh, the creator of heaven and earth, allegedly, according to the Hebrew scriptures, is also the very same one that raised Jesus from the dead. So let's turn to Rationality Rules' second argument.
The second, and perhaps most obvious flaw with miracles, is that they either commit an argument from ignorance or a personal incredulity fallacy. To illustrate this, consider the following. Throughout history, there have been numerous accounts of flightless animals raining from the sky. And needless to say, on just about every occasion, someone somewhere has asserted that a miracle has occurred, because there's no other explanation. Now, of course, it's fair to say that flightless animals don't just fall from the sky, but one can't simply assert that a miracle has occurred simply because there's no other explanation. That would be, and is, an outrageous argument from ignorance. It is, in essence, we don't know, therefore God. Anyhow, as it turns out, we now actually do have an adequate explanation, which, by the way, perfectly demonstrates why arguments from ignorance are flawed. This explanation is, quite simply, a tornado that's formed over a body of water, otherwise known as a waterspout, that's then hurled water and aquatic animals over land. It's a bizarre phenomenon, incredible even, but it's not a miracle because it doesn't violate the laws of nature. Yet, despite the fact that we now know exactly how flightless animals can rain from the sky, many people still assert that the only explanation is divine intervention, because they either don't personally know about waterspouts or they don't understand them, which, as you may or may not know, isn't an argument from ignorance, but rather it's a personal incredulity fallacy.
Now, Rationality Rules makes a pretty good point here. Nature does some freaky weird stuff, and it would be stupid for us to go ahead and just assume that it's always God who's the one that's causing it when we can't naturally explain it. Sometimes things do have natural explanations, and we need to allow investigation to happen and not just jump to assumptions. But when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus, are we really ever going to find a law that overturns the fact that dead people stay dead? I mean, I find that about as likely as us one day overturning the laws of gravity.
It's not going to happen.
It's just not going to happen. Some things just stubbornly resist our scientific framework. Now, in some cases, we need to change our scientific framework. But are we ever going to have to change the scientific framework that crucified people who've been buried for 3 days and embalmed come back to life? It's highly doubtful. Isn't it possible that there can be some facts that just completely, stubbornly defy all scientific explanation altogether and will always defy scientific explanation? Now, if Rationality Rules wants to say, no, that can't possibly be the case, science will always one day explain everything, well, that's just question begging to the extreme. This is exactly why so many of Rationality Rules' skeptical colleagues go out of their way to debunk the evidence that we have or say we have for the resurrection. They clearly understand the God implications that Jesus' resurrection would have if it actually happened.
You just don't get it, do you?
Now, Rationality Rules could go ahead and try and attack the evidence that we have for the resurrection, but if he does that, he repudiates his own claim. So let's go ahead now and look at Rationality Rules' third argument against miracles.
And this brings us comfortably to a necessary question that is extremely effective at exposing a third fallacy that ravishes miraculous assertions. This question is, how exactly can we distinguish a miracle from an unlikely natural occurrence that we are yet to comprehend? It's a very simple question, but it's a brilliant one, if I do say so myself, because it forces the proponent to bear their burden of proof, rather than allowing them to shift it to you by appealing to ignorance. And if they can't, and instead they either attempt to shift the burden of proof to you, or they simply appeal to ignorance, then guess what? Their assertion is unsubstantiated, and therefore their argument is too. Meaning that it's game over. No ifs, no buts, it's over.
What Rationality Rules is doing right now is he's appealing to the God of the Gaps fallacy, which is basically to say, I don't understand how any of this stuff works, but miracles explain it, therefore we're done here. But if you think about it, Rationality Rules is just committing a similar fallacy that I would call the future humans of the gaps fallacy. Well, I don't actually call it that. I stole that from Inspiring Philosophy, another great channel, and I will go ahead and link their video in the description down below. But it basically goes like this. I don't understand how this particular phenomena works, but future humans will eventually scientifically understand how this works. And whenever they do that, it's absolutely going to fit within my atheistic worldview. Well, again, that's totally question begging. Here's the thing, we're not just plugging God into gaps of our understanding. It just depends on the specific evidence that we have. If I were to come home and my door was kicked in, and there was money missing off my dresser, and my place was trashed, and my electronics were gone, and my wife's jewelry was gone, well, I would conclude that there was a burglar. I would call the cops. Now, in talking to the cops, if I said, hey, what are we gonna do about this burglar? And the cops look at me and say, whoa, burglar? Let's not get caught up in these burglar of the gaps theories. Well, I wouldn't accept that. No sane person would.
Take him away, Toys.
What'd you say, Chief?
Some things are clearly caused by agents. They're not caused by purely natural forces. So when we have something like the resurrection, which we can eliminate as being something that can be explained naturally, and it has the marks of agent causation, we're within our rational rights to say that it was caused by a rational being, a powerful rational being who wants to give us a sign. It would be cheating to take the supernatural explanation off the table from the very start. And let's just pretend that one day we did have a natural explanation. That doesn't necessarily mean that the natural explanation is the right one. For example, there are scientists who say that the parting of the Red Sea that Israel passed through can be explained purely by natural causes. But that doesn't explain why the Red Sea parted when Moses lifted up his rod, and it doesn't explain why the Egyptians, when they tried to chase after Israel, failed miserably.
Having fun?
Now, I'm not arguing for the historical reliability of these events. I'm just using that as an illustration to show that just because we can come up with a natural explanation for some things, it doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't caused by God. Now, in the last part of Rationality Rules video, he talks about the personal anecdotal fallacy, and he talks about appealing to emotion, and he uses faith healers to illustrate his point. Now, I do think that there are some valid people who have prayed for the sick and seen them healed, and if you want more information on that, check out Craig Keener's 2-volume work called Miracles. There are all kinds of documented miracles that have some medical attestation, and they're pretty powerful. That being said, there are a lot of frauds and tricksters out there, and Rationality Rules is absolutely right in calling some of this stuff out. But is that the same thing as the evidence that we have from Jesus' resurrection? Here's the thing about those particular situations though, those people are already expecting those kind of things to happen. And nobody is there inspecting the claims of these faith healers. If you think about it, if you're going to start a fake faith healing ministry, where are you going to start it at? Are you going to start it in the United States, where a lot of people already have that background belief? Or are you going to start it in Mecca? And I'll tell you right now, if those people know that you're coming, you're going to be dead before you hit baggage claim.
You'll be dead.
In the case of Jesus' resurrection, the disciples were preaching that Jesus rose from the dead and that God raised him in the face of the people who crucified him. Days after this happened. This wasn't an event that they could fleece an unsuspecting crowd with. Jesus' opponents had the means and the motives to produce a body, but their story was that the disciples stole it. So while Rationality Rules arguments work against some miracle claims, I don't think they work against the biggest miracle of all, which is Jesus' resurrection. I think they hopelessly fail. What do you think, Grumpy Cat? Whoa, I thought you were dead.